Welcome to Narrowboat the James Bill. Hope you're very well. Thanks for joining me. Well, now the fire's in and the fire's been lit. It's been very comfortable yesterday. It's lovely on the boat, nice and warm. I think there may be a stove fan kind of heading its way over this way, so that will help kind of spread the heat throughout the boat. But it's it's been really nice, really enjoyable to kind of sit and watch, and the glow. It's just everything you know about a fire, obviously. I've experienced last night on the boat, so that was great. And there's more progression this week. There's loads going on this week. So the main things are the electrics and the gas. So those are the two kind of the big ticket items, I guess. So the gas installation is happening hopefully mid to the end of the week. And really it's a case of two gas cans going in the gas locker, being plumbed through the bulkhead into the kitchen, and then plumbed into the hobs, and a pipe left there for whenever the oven is put on the boat, in a few paychecks time, no doubt. So that'll be the gas installation. And I mean, there'll be a bit of information I show you on there, but really gas is installed by gas safe registered. They gotta be LPG qualified, marine kind of experienced gas engineers. It's not just a case of any domestic gas engineer would do. I'm sure they know exactly what they're doing, but in terms of compliance and getting things signed off, certainly from a boat safety certificate point of view, and for some cases insurance point of views as well. But it's important that it's done by obviously a qualified gas installation person. Won't call them gas men anymore because I don't think they are. I'll obviously show you what it's all about and the various parts of the gas circuit that he puts in. There's various testing points and valves and things like that. So I'll show you all of that stuff, but it is what it is. I'm not getting too involved in it. What I'm kind of doing is letting the guy in and paying him. The thing I'm doing most of the work on is the electrics. And that's really the purpose of this video, is to explain what the 12-volt system is going to be on the boat and show you, mostly on paper, because it's not actually here and it's only, kind of just pointing at bits of the boat. You know where they're going to be, but really it's about how the system works, and kind of going into voltage drop, and the kind of the main things you need to look out for on a boat, and some of the kind of the pitfalls that people make, and the problems that you can experience as a result of those pitfalls. So that's really the plan of this one. So it might be a bit of a geek fest, so sorry if it is, but it's an important thing to cover nonetheless. Right, now, well, let's take a step back in time to when we were last in the classroom, and I'm trying to not let this send you to sleep, so I'll keep this pretty brief. But the main elements of electric jargon that you need to know, certainly for boats, but also for houses as well, is volts. Volts is obviously the measure of electric charge, if you like, energy. And you've got watts. That is the measure of energy transfer, so the power. And then you got amps, and that is the measure of volumes of electrons, if you like, the current. And there's a relationship between all of them. And if you go back to your amps, watts, volts triangle, then that is what your relationship between them is. So amps is watts divided by volts. Watts is amps times volts. Volts is watts divided by amps. So when you're looking at an appliance and it gives you the amps or it gives you the watts and you need to find out the amps, basically when you're doing your power audit, amps is the thing you need to know. You need to work out how many amp hours basically you're going to be requiring. You always know what the voltage is going to be because that's 12 and everything. So depending on what information the appliance gives you, it will give you either watts or amps. Sometimes they're good going and they give you both, but annoyingly most of them don't. Even though they know that you're going to require that figure, they just still don't give it to you. Anyway, that's how you work it all out. Okay, now let's talk about resistance. So resistance is something you'll hear quite a lot coming up, and it's really about resistance of the cabling. So resistance is a bad thing. You want low resistance. Resistance prevents the electrons flowing in their infinite freedom along the copper strands to the appliance to give it light or sound or whatever it does. And the longer the cable, the more resistance there is because of the length of it. The thinner the cable, the more resistance there is because it's thinner. There's less copper for it all to bounce around with. So, and by contrast, a real thick cable has got low resistance because there's loads of copper for the electrons to all bounce around. And a shorter cable will have a lower resistance because there's a shorter distance for the electrons to move. So that's basically it. And when you're talking about voltage drop, you need to be looking at resistance. And again, resistance forms into this triangle. So resistance equals volts divided by amps. So that is basically your resistance, and resistance is measured using that, using that Greek symbol, which is omega, and it's obviously measured in ohms, not ohms. So let's refresh ourselves with energy. So you've got a battery here with two terminals on it. Got a positive and a negative. And we know that energy is created from the flow of negatively charged electrons flowing to the positive. That's how we know electric flows these days. And so that's that. And on a circuit, any circuit, it requires two things. It requires a positive lead coming out to something and a negative coming out to something, and whatever that will be. Let's say it's let's call it a bulb. I know there's an actual swiggle for a bulb, and that's essentially it. And if there's no break in that circuit, then as long as there is charge in that battery, then that bulb will light. You don't want it to be lit all the time, so you put a break in the circuit, and the break is in the form of a switch. So you have a switch, and it's obviously always on the positive side. So that's why when you saw me mapping out the cables for the lighting in the bathroom and the dinette, it was just the positive that came down to the switch on the side wall, as opposed to both the negative and the positive. Now that's a circuit that works. There's a few elements of danger, you might say, in that circuit, because it's just the control of the flow of current. So what you do in the live side of the circuit is you would put a fuse in there, so that if there was ever a problem with this appliance, the fuse would blow, as opposed to the whole thing blowing. It would just be the fuse that goes. You should never, at this point I'll say, you should never try to just increase the size of a fuse to overcome a problem. Certainly on a boat. In a house you shouldn't really do it, but on a boat you really don't want to do it. If there's a problem in your circuit, if it's not the appliance and if it's not the source, then you know it's going to be somewhere in the cabling, and that is where fires break out. So That's why fuses are important, but do not just whack up the fuse size to compensate for the issue, because that's where, yeah, you're heading for disaster doing that. So that's the basics of a circuit and electric flow. So now let's talk about voltage drop. Let's talk about this bulb being the bulb, let's say that is the bulb in the one of the LEDs downlighters in the bow bedroom. Therefore, this cable here and this positive cable here are 10 meters long. And when cables are run over any distance, every meter that distance is, there is a voltage drop. The voltage drops because of resistance in the cable. Resistance is a bad thing for this because it basically stops the flow of energy. And the thinner the cable, the greater the resistance, because it's thinner. There is less copper strands for the energy to flow through. Therefore, the very physicality of it means there is resistance there. If you put in a much thicker cable, like a 2.5 or a 6, there is loads more copper strands in that cable, loads more area for the electrons to bounce around and get to this bulb. And therefore, by the time it gets to that bulb, there is the right amount of voltage in the cables for that bulb to work. Now, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because some appliances need very specific voltages in order to work at all, let alone properly. So that's why the thickness of these cables are really, really important, and it's because of voltage drop. There's a whole load of websites which can help you with voltage drop. I'll detail some of them on the details of this video, so you've got them, but it will tell you exactly what cable it is that you need in order to compensate for voltage drop. The basics are 3 to 5% tolerance. Anything more than 5% voltage drop, then you are going to be looking at a potential failure in the system. And when we talk about voltage drop, when this appliance or device here is not a bulb and it's a water pump, and it's quite often 8 to 10 meters away from the power source, the voltage drop on a water pump is always going to be something to really factor in. On certain things, you can get away with a bit of a voltage drop, this 3 to 5% tolerance. Some appliances don't really mind it that much. The amount of times, though, you'll hear of people that keep burning out water pumps, the amount of times I've seen water pumps which have been fitted with a 2.5 mm2 cable is just amazing. And it's because, and they'll be complaining constantly about the fact it doesn't work and it burns out. The reason for it is quite straightforward. The water pump, and many of them do this, they will tell you it runs at 4.4 or 5 amps. And when you look at your voltage calculator, your voltage drop calculator, on a 2.5 millimeter cable, you're kind of within that tolerance. And that's why a lot of them, same with whale gulpers, you see are connected using this 2.5. The reality is, though, if you look at the actual usage of a water pump throughout its whole cycle, it's doing most of its work in the kind of the last eighth of its timing. So if it's running for 15 minutes, the last 2.5 minutes of that, that's when it's doing all its work. And at that moment, it's not really drawing 4.4 amps, it's drawing more like 6, 7, or even 8, which is why over a sustained period of time, when it's doing its most work, if it's not getting the full amount of power, that's why it burns out. Which is why I'll be fitting my water pump and the whale gulper with a 9 millimeter cable, just to make sure that it's got
absolutely ample. It is, you know, it's quite a long track of cables, fairly expensive to do so, but no more so than replacing a water pump after 2 years, which you so often hear, that good make water pumps that have been installed, when I say installed correctly, but used correctly, just because the cables are incorrect. These things burn out after 2 years, and they shouldn't. They should last 4 or 5 years. So if you are going through a water pump like every year or something, have a look at your cabling, because it might be that it's just not enough. The golden rule with it all is, if in doubt, go up a size. So this is now, again, we'll draw out the boat, but I think we'll just draw out the inside of the boat this time. Okay. So the batteries are all going to be sitting there in the battery bank in the engine well, and the control unit, the charger unit, will be there at the stern. And as I said, the solar panels on the roof will feed into that, and that will then chuck it into the batteries. And then in return, the batteries will feed through, well, there'll be an isolation switch there, then it will come through into a fuse box. So we'll put an F for a fuse box, and then it will go through into a distribution panel or distribution board. And that's a panel that you'd have, basically it's a box where all the switches are. And that's where all of the 12-volt cables will come out from. So each circuit will feed back into that distribution box. And there you can have any size of these you want. So this is where you start working out what you've got. So up here, you've got the bow bedroom lights, and they feed back the negative straight back to there. And as you may remember, the positive goes back to the switch, and that goes along with that one as well. The bathroom lights, of which there are 3, they're linked together like that, and they then go back to the distribution box, and the positive on there goes from there down to the light switch and then back. Same with the dinette lights, of which there are 4. They feed back, and the positive goes to the light switch there on the wall and then back. And the galley lights, there's one there, there's one above the sink, there's one there, and there's one there. And they all feed back to there. Actually, sorry, on this one, they actually feed back to there, and the switch is on that side. As you walk in the boat, it's on your right hand side, which is a bit of a pain because it means I need to move one over the door. You with electric, you always go up, so you'd go over the door and then back down. But I'm gonna need power down this side gunnel anyway, so it's not the end of the world. So that's gonna go round to the switch and then back into the distribution box that way. So that's where the lights are. They're all running through the ceiling. And then inside the boat, well, and a bit on the outside of the boat, there's lots more cabling. So right here at the front, there are 2 tunnel lights, and then there are the, I don't know why I've drawn it like that, there are the 2 navigation lights. Now, a couple of things to think about here. Obviously, these can get away with 2.5mm cable running all the way. However, The navigation lights you're going to want to, you'd never want one on without the other, so they're going to be linked together. So how that's going to work is the cable run down the gunnel to there, and then over the ceiling to that one, and then the positive again over to there, and then back down there, and then the switch will be at the distribution box for that. The tunnel lights pretty much exactly the same, so they'll both run down this side here and back down there, and again it will run either over the ceiling, most likely to be over the ceiling, to link those two together. So those are the two lights there. The other things in the bow are the water pump, which is there. That's gonna require cabling. That's much thicker cabling. That's gonna run down the starboard side. There's no switch on a water pump. You can turn it on and off, obviously, from the distribution box, but you don't turn it on and off when you're using it. Unlike in the bathroom, where there is going to be the whale gulper and the toilet fan, those are both going to have switches coming off them, so they can be turned on and off. In the dinette, there's just going to be charge sockets, and they're all going to be running down this side and then back down. On this side of the dinette, there is going to be a, I'd say, entertainment unit. I think that's over dramatizing it. It's a television and a 4G router, but those are going to be there. The cables for the router and for the TV are both going to run down the gunnels here into the TV unit there. Again, the TV needs to have an adequate cable to make sure that it's got the power it requires. Things like televisions, 12-volt TV is going to need 12 volts for it to be running. It can't be having a 8% voltage drop, because it just won't work. So yeah, so bigger cables for there. And then in the galley, really, it's just going to be the fridge is the main thing, and obviously that takes a really chunky cable to get into for the powering of the fridge. The only other things is the hobs. They will require something, and there'll be some switches down here, some plug sockets that I can put in 12-volt blenders and 12-volt soup things and stuff like that. You can get pretty much everything on 12-volt. Certainly kind of onboard appliances you can. In the dinettes here, there will be charge points for laptops and things like that. There'll also be charge points up here in the bow, certainly in the bow bedroom, but right at the front there at the in that kind of seating area, there'll be areas that you can plug in phones or whatever it is up there. And again, each one of those will have its own cables. So running down the gunnels here, there is quite a lot of cabling. Fortunately, I've got 15 centimeters of width of under gunnel tray, so I've got plenty to kind of lay it all quite neatly, so it's all kind of traceable. That's the idea, is to make sure that it's traceable. So if there's a problem anywhere, you can easily access all the cabling, route it back to where the problem is, and fix it. Well, I've had to come outside just to wake myself up slightly. I'm so sorry, that was really dull, but it had to be kind of explained. It is what it is. It's the flow of electricity around the boat, but yeah, there we go. I'm sorry, but there we go. It's done now. Until next time, hope you guys are very well. Take care. Bye bye.